Are we supposed to see people like, oh, okay.
They can see you now, yeah.
Yeah, we're live.
Hey.
Hot mic.
All right.
Okay, I'm back.
Hey, folks. We're going to give it a few minutes as people keep coming in. Thank you for joining us. All right, we're going to give it a couple more minutes. All right. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are going to start off this live conversation with a moment of silence. Today is Tamir Rice's birthday. Tamir Rice is a 12-year-old who was killed in the city of Cleveland, and today he would have been 18 years old. We want to take a moment to acknowledge all those who have experienced direct harm or have been harmed by systemic indifference. So we want to take a few moments before we begin. Thank you. Thank you for holding space with us in honor of those who have been impacted, in honor of us. So my name is Shakira Diaz. I am the Partnership Director for the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and I am also the Ohio State Director. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us in the country. Thank you. I want to give my amazing colleagues an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I want to start off with Tara Tucker.
Hi, everybody. Tara Tucker. I am the Texas State Director for Alliance for Safety and Justice.
And hello, everyone. I'm Sabash Katil. I'm the Florida State Director for the Alliance for Safety and Justice.
Thank you. So I know many of you have already joined many of these live conversations. Just want to give you some brief background on our organization. We are a national multi-state organization centered on lifting up new safety priorities that include our people, that are informed by our people, and get money towards reducing harm, reducing crime, and supporting our communities. We work and are driven by two really key constituencies: people with prior convictions and underserved victims of crime. So with that, we will kick it off to how we're going to get this conversation going. So let's start off with just kind of sharing a little bit about ourselves. You know, what brought you to Safe and Just? Tara, I want to start with you. You know, I know that you have a very lengthy professional experiences working in the justice field. So what brought you to Safe and Just?
So yeah, I spent 10 years working for Senator Whitmire in the Criminal Justice Committee, and I loved my job. But while I was there, I noticed that a lot of the laws and the policies that we were working on and passing had dealt more with punishment and enhancing penalties for horrible things that had been done. And a lot of times they used survivors to promote these changes, but a lot of times survivors didn't look like us. They were middle class, white people who had had horrific things happening to them, but the solutions to those didn't do anything to prevent those things from happening again. In addition to that, I saw, resources being put into organizations that were helping people, but they weren't reaching all people. They weren't reaching people in communities most harmed and least helped. And so it was very appealing to me to find this organization and see that that was at the heart of what they were doing. It's finding solutions that stop crime instead of just reacting to crime.
And now you're part of elevating those solutions. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And, coming from the great state of Texas, it's a huge state and lots of work to do there. So thank you. Subhash, what brought you to Safe and Just?
Well, a lot of things I think brought me to Safe and Just. The stuff I'd like to share is, I think, one, in the moment that Trayvon Martin was murdered, I think a friend, colleague, and our CEO, Robert Rooks, had put out an amazing op-ed about who has the right to be a survivor and who doesn't. And it really kind of shook me into the conversations we weren't having in the criminal justice system about who's considered a victim or a survivor and who's not, and how folks are treated as a result. And I think I realized that was really an important and missing conversation when we're talking about the way forward and what justice and safety and these other issues look like.
Thank you. For me, so I'm from Ohio. I'm from Cleveland. For me, I would say it was a long journey. I started out professionally as an educator. I was very fortunate. I worked, my last job was working at my old high school. I loved working with teenagers. But it became very clear and apparent to me that despite all the hard work of myself and my colleagues and all the hard work on the part of my students and their families, so many barriers surrounded our community. So many barriers made it nearly impossible for them to just kind of continue to jump these hurdles. A lot of times hurdles that I had not seen, a lot of times hurdles that they had not seen. And it became clear to me that there was something else going on that I wasn't aware of. So I left education to learn more about the criminal justice system. It was a career that I did not expect to have. Obviously, I've been, like most Black people and people of color and people who live in poor communities in this country, I have been touched, but I didn't understand the intentionality or the systemic way in which the criminal justice system or the unjust system touches so many of us. So that was one. It was my love for my students who grew up just like I did. And the other piece was just recognizing that in our communities, we're targeted and we're ignored at the same time. We're targeted when it comes to criminalization or penalties and punitive responses, and often disproportionate punitive responses, while at the same time ignored when we need help. And that became really clear to me when a family that I was very close with lost a child, and in learning about this question that was on this application to seek services and support for victims' compensation. And that question was whether or not the child victim and the mother who lost the child had a felony conviction. And for me, that moment, I froze in time. It was literally one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Watching someone who's already in just tremendous pain be asked such an irrelevant question. It just hit me so hard that even in our victimization, even in death, felonies follow us. So it was at that moment that I realized, I need to do this work differently, and doing it in a different way. So that's what brought me here. I think this is a good point to transition to a question that we often talk about, amongst ourselves, with our colleagues. What was that moment that you had where you realized that centering our communities the way that we do is what is going to redefine what safety looks like in a way that includes us? Subhash, you want to start off?
Yeah, and I have the privilege of working with a lot of leaders in 10 counties in Florida, and I feel like there's always a series of moments, and there's two that stick out to me that I think make sense to share. So the first is, I was actually, two of us were in an Uber drive after we had a meeting in Tallahassee, and the Uber driver was a retired police officer, great guy. And as we were talking, we were having a conversation on mental health in Florida. And for a lot of people that don't know, one of the biggest responders to mental health issues in Florida is the criminal justice system. It's not, mental health providers. It's often police and the prison system. And I was just asking him, I was like, what are your resources when you would get a mental health call, when someone needs mental health? And he's like, honestly, the resources I have, speaking in a moment of honesty, as a retired police officer, he was just like, the resources I had are to arrest someone and not arrest them, or to shoot them and not shoot them. And I don't have anything more, right? And that really shook me. And the second thing that really kind of highlighted, we were in a training with a community leader in Orlando. I live in Orlando now. And there's a neighborhood in Orlando called Pine Hills, right? And I grew up in a city like this as well. There's a lot of neighborhoods that are described by the crime rate, right? So the kind of sick joke about how you call Pine Hills, you call it Crime Hills, right? That refers to the victimization that happens there, right? And in the conversation we were having in this training among survivors and leaders was like, this neighborhood is actually a neighborhood of survivors that need resources to survive and move forward and put the communities back together. But when the jokey name is Crime Hills, right? The perception is that it's a neighborhood full of criminals, not a neighborhood full of survivors. And so your solutions to that neighborhood are what you do to a neighborhood full of criminals versus what you do to a neighborhood full of survivors. And how deep that perception of who a survivor is or isn't, so that we look at a neighborhood where a lot of crime and violence is happening, and we presume that everyone there is a criminal rather than everyone there is a survivor that needs something to help them move past this cycle of crime and violence, or resources to help them do what they're already doing, kind of really shook us in that conversation. So I think those are the two aha moments I really had about why we need to do this work.
That I love how you frame that, Subhash. A lot of times, in this work, people will say, they are criminals and they are crime victims. A lot of times there's overlap. A lot of times, someone who experienced harm at a young age later comes in contact with the justice system, often because they were never supported. So, there's like this overlapping circle instead of like these polarizing ideas. It's essentially the same community. Tara, how about you?
I think one of the major things that stands out for me is the first time I toured a trauma recovery center in San Francisco. And, I was listening to the people, the survivors talk about their stories, and just really recognizing that so much of what had made them better was receiving services, and not actually, getting convictions for the people who had harmed them. Like, that was a part of the process, which they were able to do because of the services they were getting in the trauma recovery center. But that wasn't what actually made them better. What made them better was getting services and being around other people. And I think really seeing that made me understand that, the important part is healing people. We want to get dangerous people off the streets, but really healing them so that they can, be whole and maybe help somebody else, was what really brought it home for me.
Yeah.
And then, like you were saying, recognizing that so many people in the system never had that opportunity to heal, you know, and if we could just get those services in all communities, when something happens, they can heal instead of self-medicating or lashing out, then we could do so much more.
Yeah. It's so much about like centering and acknowledging the humanity that we all have. It's not like certain people have humanity and others do not. All of us do. But what often happens is that we are excluded, right? There are so many communities that are not even considered in this calculation as human beings. For me, I've had many. I'll say two of them. So we're a multi-state organization, and a couple years ago we did a justice fair in Stockton, which is literally one of the hottest places on earth. And we were doing it was essentially an expungement fair, but it was like a family fair. I'd never seen an expungement fair look like that. People brought their children, entire families came out to celebrate their loved one getting their record expunged as an outcome of Proposition 47. And I was working the welcome booth to register people. And to my left, there's a man who was tatted from his neck all the way down. And this man was so happy and just welcoming everyone and embracing everyone. And I love the idea of like, this man would be someone that would be villainized, someone that people would consider scary. But he was just this beautiful man, enjoying the day, celebrating other people and getting their records expunged. So that was one moment for me that was really important. The other was we were doing a video photography project where survivors were telling their stories. And I was sitting with a mom from Chicago. This is different. Like Chicago's like one of the coldest places I've been to. But this mom is sharing about the day that her son was shot. And her son was shot the day after the 9/11. So she's on the phone with her brother who lived in New York. She's talking to him and she hears gunshots. She hangs up, runs downstairs, and looks across the street and sees her son's shoes. He just got these shoes. So she runs over and she's holding her son. And I'm listening to her and she's telling me one of her neighbor comes over and says, he's going to make it. And her response was, but with what? He was shot in the head. She knew that even if he survived, the quality of his life was not going to be good. So she told me that in that moment, while she's holding her son, she started to pray to have the strength to help her family get through this. Then she said she started to pray for the kids who shot her son. And I stopped. I was frozen in that moment. And I said, how were you able to do that in that time? And she said, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that I know our children need support. I know our children need programs. I know our children need investments. And my other sons could have done the same thing to someone else's son. So in this moment of like tremendous loss and pain, this amazing mom, who's really like a mom to all the children in her community, right, recognized that all children in communities that are not invested in could be in her son's shoes or could be in the shoes of the kids who killed her son. So it's given me the opportunity to see like the best of humanity. And that's what I love. It's like we get a chance to like give space for people to like share their stories without shame, to be the heroes that they are. So that's, for me, that's part of it. Transitioning to like where we're at right now, like we're in like the weirdest time on earth. We're like living in the twilight zone. It's like between COVID and these uprisings that are happening not just all over this country, but in every continent in the world, fighting against, screaming against anti-racism, right? Like it's amazing, right? I want us to talk a little bit about like what is shifting and what is not shifting. Like, Subhash, do you see the justice system or the concept or the idea of public health systems shifting in this moment?
You're muted.
I've never done that before, so thank you for pointing that out. It's so hard for me to predict the future, right? But here's what I know. Often when we're in communities and we're talking alongside leaders, and alongside survivors, we ask a series of questions, right? How easy is it to be the victim of a crime in your community, right? How easy is it to get arrested over something relatively simple and stupid, right? And the first question, how easy is it to be a victim of crime? In almost every community that we do a conversation in, Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando, Tampa, so on and so forth, the answer is it's very hard, right? I mean, it's very easy to be a victim of crime, right? How easy is it to get arrested for something really silly in a state where, driving on a suspended license a third time is a felony? Oh, it's really easy, right? How easy is it to get a murder solved in your community? Extremely difficult, right? How easy is it to get therapy or other services if you're the victim of a crime? Extremely difficult, right? Those are the answers almost across the board, standardized, and a lot of the communities that we talk in. And the thing is, that's not a functioning system of public safety. And if we're really going to have a serious conversation about what public safety looks like, we have to commit ourselves to making those answers be different, right? Right, like point blank, straight up, those answers have to be different. And like, what's funny about those questions is those answers come instantaneously. They don't require a lot of thought, or you know what I mean. People just shout them out, and there's not really a dissenting voice or a debate in a lot of the communities that we ask those questions in, right? Oh yeah, we live in a community where it's really easy to get arrested for trespassing. Well, there's a lot of victimization, but it's really easy to get arrested for trespassing, and it's really hard to get a murder investigated, right?
Right.
And so I think in terms of the pre-COVID past, that was our status quo before COVID, before the protests, before anything, right? And so I think we really have to commit to our public safety system being different. And I mean this sincerely, and that means talking to survivors first in the period moving forward. And really seeing not just survivors, but there's also folks in the community that feel like it is their responsibility, that don't have an official title to keep the community healthy and safe, that do it with zero resources.
Right.
A lot of our leaders in our network are the one who, when someone gets shot in the neighborhood, someone knows to come to their house before they call 911, right? Because that's a safe place to be, because this person's a community leader. We know the church that folks go to when they're the victim of domestic violence, and like there's these leaders in the community that do this work often with no budget, often with no formalized training. Sometimes they do it because something happened to their family members or themselves as well. And we really have to start looking to those folks as experts in this next phase.
Right.
When we talk about public safety. Like I feel like the conversations around defund, refund, or whatnot is one thing. It's who are we supporting to keep us safe that aren't given the resources to do it, but do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because they see it as their responsibility. And can we resource them, but also can we just ask them what works? Can we just have that conversation with people that should know the answer to that question? To me, that's our fundamental challenge moving forward. Because if we're not ready to have that, then in my opinion, those answers that I talked about in the beginning aren't going to be different. And honestly, with every fiber in my body, I just want those answers to be different. I want there to be a debate or a conversation in some community I'm going in, and we're having a conversation and where we're like, is it easier to be a victim of crime in this community? I want the answer to be no. Is it easy to get services? Yes, it's awesome. It's great. You know what I mean? And I just want that answer to be different or contested in more communities in this state.
Yeah, I'll thank you for that, because you're speaking to like who really knows what's going on, who really knows how to help, who has that cultural humility to be able to create a space that acknowledges people, and I'll add to your list, you know, those people who are working as violence interrupters, those people who are direct reentry service providers, like people who've lived this stuff know. And those are the ones who need to be funded and supported. Tara, how about you?
You know, I don't know if there's a systemic shift happening. I'm optimistic about it, but I know there's been uprisings before and minimal changes happened. It moves me and it gives me hope that this is happening on such a large stage. Mm-hmm. You know, you have small rural communities in Texas that are coming out and marching and talking and shedding light in places where, you know, never would have done. There are places where I wouldn't have gone in the past just because I didn't think I would be safe. And so seeing that just so many people of different backgrounds and different experiences are saying enough is enough, or even recognizing like, oh, wait, maybe I should be thinking about what's going on and how our systems are biased and, you know, what actually is going to work. I think that that's good. And that gives me hope. I'm a little bit put off by the fact that, you know, with COVID relief dollars, they're coming down, but they're still going to like large organizations who in the past haven't been serving everybody and reaching every community. And, you know, they haven't made a good enough effort to get those resources to the community-based organizations that you were just talking about, the people who are on the ground and know the people, know the situation, but have always been underfunded. And so I guess we'll see if that changes. And I'm also concerned that because of COVID and because places like Texas and Florida are having spikes and there's such crisis just behind COVID that it's going to overshadow the other stuff that's going on. So,
yeah. Okay.
We'll see.
You know, what is shifting, what is not? Are the systems shifting? Is that, you know, are public health systems going to shift, or are they shifting? So one thing I'll say is like, people are pushing that shift, right? Like we're the same as Texas, in the regard that, I mean, Ohio has made national news for having small towns and villages that are like population 3,000. They got like 5 Black people, and they're having these rallies, right? Because I think there's something to be said about, one, I'm acknowledging that racism is real, but there's also this thing that I think is happening of people recognizing that systems have been doing everybody wrong to different degrees and in different ways, but systems have been doing that. And I think that that is motivating a lot of those small communities who have felt ignored, just like those of us who live in big cities have felt ignored. So I think that commonality of being ignored is going to push these systems. Like, never before have we heard conversations about defunding the way that we're hearing it now. We've never heard conversations about, I mean, Ohio and many other states around the country, our leadership in the Legislative Black Caucus are pushing for ordinances and laws around declaring racism a public health issue. That would not have happened last year. And I'm not saying that this is like a smooth debate, but I am saying that it's happening. And I'm really motivated by the number of young people who are out here pushing their parents, pushing their grandparents. I mean, I just saw something of like this 90-year-old woman who was like, for my birthday, I want to protest. Right. So I think that that's what these systems are going to have to shift, because the dynamic that you thought you had on lock, these systems, had on lock is shifting now because consciousness is shifting in a way. People are talking very openly and calling out things that they were not calling out because they didn't see it, or they learned to adapt to it. Yeah. So, conversation leads to stuff. So, and the consistent push and the recognition leads to stuff too.
And can I say one more thing about what
Yeah, sure.
just off the cuff is just getting to me. The number of people, because been around these conversations for a while, for about 2 decades. The number of people that have been following up and showing up to the local commission meetings and the local city council hearings,
Right.
like where these budget conversations are actually happening, and really starting to ask questions about how is our money being spent.
Our money. That's right. It's our money.
Our money. And, I think folks have gotten taken aback that 45 to 65% of our local budgets are being spent on any one thing without us thinking about it and whether that thing is effective or not. In this case, public safety, right? Like how is, 40 cents to 60 cents of my check going to something that I'm not even able to evaluate the effectiveness of, right? And how could that happen any other day? Like that gives me hope. When a bunch of folks that didn't even know who the commissioner was 3 weeks ago are like showing up at a commission meeting talking about budgets, I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, bossing up, like showing up like I'm your boss. You work for me, right? And holding these systems accountable, right? Like people have been shaken to that point where they are showing up, they're asking questions, and they're doing it like in ways that before this people will probably say, well, that's not appropriate. Appropriateness has gone completely out the window, right? People are going with this fierceness, which is just energizing, to see. Yeah. Thank you for that, Subhash. So, okay. So we're on our last question, and our last question is what's next? Or, so I'm going to start off with the state of Ohio. Ohio is a top incarcerating state overall, has the 4th largest female prison population in the country. But we've done some great work in this state. A lot more has to happen. We have the 2nd highest overdose rate in the nation. And we're seeing movement, but we're also, people have this commitment to being punitive is a habit also, right? Like people get caught up in like, you trip and fall, like you need 5 years. And then on top of that, you need like 5 more years of probation. So I think that this moment, the fight is going to have to continue. And it is going to be a hard one. But I believe that people are in for it because the eye-opening that's happening is going to force decisions to be made. Elections are coming up, right? So people have to consider, how are voters in my community responding to everything that's going on? And it is not a big city problem anymore, right? It's a small community problem and people are speaking to it. So, that's what I see, some persistence that needs to happen to shift those folks who have had this habit of being punitive. Tara, what's going on? What's next for Texas?
Well, in Texas, we have about 7 CSSJ chapters in Texas, and they're growing. And I think that really mobilizing them and giving them the opportunity to share what they're seeing in their communities and uplift those voices.
Right.
I think that getting them to the meetings that you're talking about and just giving them the space to tell others what they need and what they see. I think there is I'm having conversations with a more diverse group of people about what the problems in our criminal justice system are and the size and the way people just get stuck in our prisons.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful that with the new people coming to that conversation and shedding the light on it, that we can make some serious changes here in the next little while.
Yeah, good. Subhash, Florida?
So in Florida, about 96,000 people are serving time in state prison, and that costs the state about $20,000 a year per person. And at the same time, like I said before, between 40 and 60% of budgets in places like Miami locally are being spent on public safety dollars.
Right.
On top of that, our states at near depression levels of employment, and we're facing what everyone else is facing in terms of COVID-19, right? And so as millions and in some cases billions of dollars are coming into the state, through the CARES Act, through future stimulus coming down, I think it's really important for us to really start asking the question about what types of institutions are we funding with our money, right? And what needs to fundamentally change. And so, we have 10 chapters of crime survivors across the state of Florida: Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Dade City, St. Pete, and Naples, Naples, and yes, I'm gonna call every single county out because I'm gonna rep my state.
I see what you're doing. We hear it.
If I knew the area codes, I would, but no. But I think there's an important conversation of us both identifying how the resources coming down to the state are being used, and are they being used in service of us? And that question is always important to ask, whether that money is being used well or not. And plenty of our leaders use that money perfectly fine, but still need to be asked how it's being spent, right? Yeah. And on the public safety lens, especially, a lot of survivors have stepped up and been like, well, the system didn't work for me in the past, right? I had to spend my own money on hiring a private investigator, or I needed to, go to a church support group because there was no therapist in my county, or, I couldn't apply for compensation because of X, Y, and Z reason. So whatever you thought you were doing in my name isn't working anymore and needs to change, right? I think those conversations are super important and super vital. I think they'll continue to happen. So I think a couple of different things. One, survivors are stepping forward, and a lot of folks are wanting to know more about how they can change the system to something different that can actually speak for them in the right way, because it's actually addressing safety and security and healing and everything. But then there's also a growing conversation of people questioning how our money is being spent to help us and keep us safe and healthy, and how that's actually happening. I think that's great. I think that's amazing. We always say, they say hurt people, but healed people also heal people.
That's right.
You need to invest in that healing for that to really happen. So
yeah. Oh, this was great, guys. I miss y'all. I miss seeing y'all in real life.
I miss you guys too.
Yeah.
Oh, likewise. Oh wait, we have an audience too. Oh my God.
I'm really glad that we got a chance to do this, and I'm really glad that we're doing this work. At the end of the day, like, I know that we're all coming from a variety of different reasons for very diverse personal experiences, but I also, what I love greatly about what we do, whether we're talking about those policies that need to support underserved victims of crime, or those policies that need to better support people with prior convictions, is that we're lifting this shame of these labels, right, that have been put on us, right, that essentially say you're not worthy, and we're joining all together and say, no, we are worthy. And you're going to switch this stuff up. I didn't say the word that was naturally coming out of my mouth, so I said stuff. But I'm just, glad to be doing this with all of you. For everyone joining us, thank you so much. Please continue to watch these. I'm sure you'll get to hear from some of our other amazing colleagues. And follow us on all of our networks so that you can stay engaged, so that your voice is lifted up, and that we make things better for all of our little people, like Tara's daughter. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.